So when I first began playing badminton after like 15 years away from the courts, I first played with a budget badminton shoe before upgrading to the super popular Yonex 65C3 that it feels like everyone out there is playing with right now. And at first I was super impressed. The grip was so gluey, it was so comfortable, it felt really amazing. But now that I've tested a bunch more badminton shoes, I realized that while it's a good shoe, it's really nothing special when you compare with other top-tier badminton shoes that cost about the same. If you're in the same boat as me, I bet you'll like this guide. Today I'll show you different steps how you can find the right badminton shoe for you. So if you feel fatigued after playing, if you have slight pain in your knees or your legs or your feet sometimes, it could be a clue that you're not playing in the right badminton shoe for you. When I only played in this shoe, I felt quite fatigued after every session on court, and I thought it was normal because I saw everyone else playing in this shoe as well. But the crazy part is I realize now that that is absolutely not the case. Now before we dive into all the good stuff, there's a couple of points I'd like to. Readers sometimes ask if you can use shoes from squash or paddle or basketball or other indoor sports to play badminton in as well. And honestly, I don't know. Normally it's possible provided it has this non-marking outsole, but badminton shoes have certain features that are badminton specific. The grip, for example, is made to move sideways as much as it is to move forward and backwards because we have all these explosive movements in badminton. There is some extra padding on the outside here to help with durability when we're launching, along extra cushioning in, for example, the toe box on some badminton shoes. So I think it's possible to play in other indoor shoes, but if you're serious about the sport, it's probably worth upgrading to a real badminton shoe to get all the benefits. It goes without saying that you should play in the right size shoe. The issue is that the top tier badminton shoe brands tend to have different sizing. So for example, I use a size 45. In Yonex and Victor, I use a size 44.5. And in Mizuno, I use a size 44. So you'll find it much easier to measure your foot in centimeters or millimeters while you're wearing a sock, because that'll be consistent across all the brands. So for example, all of those different sizes becomes a size 285 millimeters. So it's much easier to go to a store and tell them I need that size in millimeters. And finally, remember to break in your shoes before playing. Some pairs will feel really painful if you're just taking them out of the box as you're getting on court. I'm Aske from Beast Badminton. Let's dive into step number 1. So in step number 1, let's look at speed versus support. The easiest way to make sense of the badminton shoe jungle is to make a simple. Where on one side we have lightweight shoes and on the other side we have super heavy and bulky badminton shoes. And then somewhere in the middle we have this all-around category that kind of blends the two in different ways. On the lightweight side you have obviously a lower weight, you have stripped away more cushioning and padding. On the heavier side, you tend to have more injury preventive features and more comfort. The goal for you in this step is to figure out which direction you're most interested in. Now, speaking to other players and readers on the blog, I've noticed that whereas I might fall into the all-around category, people with a smaller body frame tend to prefer shoes that are more on the lightweight side, and they don't get fatigued or even pain that I would get playing in more lightweight shoes. On the other hand, people with a bigger body frame tend to prefer shoes that are more cushioned and more comfortable to help carry that extra load. Let's move on to looking at the subcategories. So in step 2, we'll dive things in even further. Now there are different subcategories within these 3 overarching categories, and I'm basing them less on what the brands categorize them on and more as how they feel to play in when you get on court. Because the brands tend to use the same keywords for all the shoes. I don't know if you've noticed, sometimes it looks like all the shoes are like lightweight, they're ultimate cushioning, amazing comfort, and it just makes everything more confusing. So the subcategory: fit, speed, comfort, and injury prevention within each of these categories. Now, if you feel confused about the difference between, say, comfort in an all-around badminton shoe and comfort in a supportive badminton shoe, It's just the degree of comfort applied to that shoe. So in the supportive shoe, it'll be heavier and it'll go all in on comfort, whereas in the all-around category, it'll be more balanced, where they're trying to strip away some weight while having some comfort. When it comes to comfort versus injury prevention, I first thought those two were kind of the same thing, but they're really not. So comfort is the padding in the midsole and in the toe box and in the heel sometimes, whereas injury prevention tend to take a more stiffer approach that's less soft. And if we look at the Eclipsion C3 from Yonex, you'll notice that it has quite a tall and quite a stiff heel, especially if we compare against the Yonex 65 C3. That's a typical all-around shoe. You'll notice that the heel is slightly taller and feels more stiff. Another example is the outsole, where you'll see the top piece and the bottom piece connected into one piece for a more stable landing, whereas on a less injury preventive shoe, it won't be connected. So those are clues to look at if you're looking for badminton shoes online for injury prevention. In terms of comfort, it's pretty difficult to recognize with the naked eye. Sometimes you'll see the midsole being slightly higher, but otherwise it's really much easier to recognize comfort when you're trying the shoes on. So the goal in step 2 is to figure out which subcategory you are leaning most towards. So to take myself as an example, I prefer something along the lines of comfort between support and the all-around shoes. Next, let's move on to step 3, understanding the shape of your feet. Some badminton shoes come in wide editions for people with wider feet, and for you, you'll typically know it already. It gets more tricky when you're looking at normal badminton shoes and having to figure out if they're slightly on the wider side or slightly on the narrower side. So for me, most flagship Yonex badminton shoes tend to be too roomy and too wide for me, even in the normal edition, as I have slightly narrow feet. For those of you playing in flagship badminton shoes, if you're feeling fatigued on the side of the big toe, that could be a clue that the toe box is a bit too roomy, even on the normal edition. On the other hand, if you're playing in, say, Victor's A970 and it feels too narrow, it might be a clue that your feet are slightly wide. Other questions that are worth asking yourself is, do you get blisters on your toes when you're playing or in the heel area? And do you prefer a more snug fit or a more loose and soft fit for your badminton shoes? Now I know this was a lot to cover, but in my experience it's been well worth it if you feel some slight fatigue or slight pain after playing, since the right badminton shoes seem to be able to fix that. Now that you have a better sense of what kind of badminton shoes you prefer, I suggest looking up shoe reviews or going directly to my guide on the best badminton shoes. I'll leave a link in the description. Otherwise, go to Google and search for Beast Badminton and it'll pop right up. I'm Aske from Beast Badminton. I'll see you on court.